Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Hansen. I'm a technical support engineer with the network security group here at Sophos. And today we're going to be walking through how to encrypt a standalone UTM root EBS volume for Sophos UTM on AWS. So the information in this video is going to be based off of the Sophos knowledge base article number 132477, and it, along with other knowledge base articles, of course, can be found on the Sophos community page at community.sophos.com. Now, just before we get started, we've got a few things to cover. One would be that this knowledge base article is intended for standalone UTM instances only. So, unfortunately, if you're using the UTM in a high availability or an auto scaling deployment method, this article is not going to cover those methods. It's just not supported, unfortunately. Not to say that in HA or auto scaling, the environment couldn't be modified to facilitate encrypted volumes. It's rather the change wouldn't be persistent. So once you were to upgrade the firmware version or do any sort of update via the CloudFormation stack, the change would be reverted, and obviously it could create chaos to your environment. So number two, plan for downtime. The instance will need to be shut down in order for this process to proceed. So you could see upwards of 10 to 15 minutes of downtime, depending on I guess the size of the instance primarily, but in any case, I would recommend you plan accordingly for the instance to be off from anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes, just 30 minutes on the safe side. Um, that's it. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and switch to our AWS console. Okay, so the first step we're going to want to do is to shut down the UTM instance. So we'll go ahead and do that here. And there we go. And so the reason, of course, we want to shut down the instance is because at some point during the process, we're going to need to um, detach the EBS volume from the instance. And in order to do this, of course, the instance has to be stopped. So this might take a minute to shut down. So I guess I'll just mention in the meantime that although in the knowledge base articles, videos based off of there are instructions on how to do this via the AWS CLI. We're just going to focus on the AWS console today. Reason being is the AWS CLI would be more suited towards someone who maybe wants to do this process for UTMs en masse. So if you have, 10, 15 UTMs and you want to do this in one fell swoop, you might take these AWS CLI commands and write some sort of bash or Python script to automate the process. But for the average user who maybe has one or two instances, like we do here today, it's probably just simpler and quicker to actually do it via the UI. Than it is trying to figure out, the AWS CLI, which is a little bit of a steeper learning curve. Okay, looks like our instance is stopped in any case, so we can go ahead to the next section. So what we'll want to do is just to scroll down on the instance info and find the root device. If we click on that and then click on the volume ID or the EBS ID, that'll bring us to the volumes page. And we can right click on the volume and detach it. So this should happen pretty much instantaneous. Yeah, there she goes. So the state is available, and once the state is available, we can go ahead and create our snapshot. So let's right click on that, go to create snapshot. There aren't too many options here when you're creating the snapshot. You can see we certainly can't select to encrypt the volume. Pretty much all we can do is add some tags and write in a description. So what I will do is name it well, you can see I've done this before. I will name it something, actually let's do UTM dash in unencrypted. And we're going to label it like this just so it makes it easier to differentiate between this snapshot and the later, the encrypted snapshot we're going to create. So what we'll do is create that, click through here, and if we navigate over to the snapshots page, we can see status is pending and 3% in progress. It will probably take a couple minutes to complete this, so maybe what we'll do is just pause the video and then I'll resume it once it's finished. Okay. Okay, and as we can see here, our snapshot is completed. So the next step we are going to want to do is to copy the snapshot, and by copying it, we're going to be creating a encrypted snapshot. So the reason why we do it this way is because if we just try to create a volume based off of this unencrypted snapshot, there's no way to toggle encryption or turn encryption on. So let's cancel out of here and go ahead and right click on our snapshot, left click on copy, and double check the destination region. It's good. I'll go ahead and change the description so it's a little more in line with what we called described the previous snapshot. So for this one, we are going to name it as UTM encrypted. And of course, the most important step is to toggle encryption. Now, for me, I don't have anything configured for key management, so I'll just use the default master key as provided by Amazon. And we can go ahead and copy, and that will start the process. And there we go, pending. So you will notice that the encrypted snapshot is going to take a little bit longer than the unencrypted snapshot to create, maybe 5 minutes, 6 minutes. So maybe this is a good time to once again pause the video and wait for this to complete and pick up after it's done. All right, so it looks like our encrypted snapshot is completed. So the next thing we're going to want to do is create the encrypted volume. So if we right click on our snapshot, left click on create volume, we can see a bunch of options pop up here. The first one would be volume type, which I would recommend leaving as is. Unless you have some really specific reason why you want or need to change it. Honestly, I don't know of too many circumstances. In fact, I can't recall any cases where the general purpose SSD was not sufficient in giving the UTM what it needed for reading and writing on the disk. In any case, if you did want to change that, you can do it later without having to reboot the instance. It's pretty straightforward on the EC2 console page. For the disk size, you could change this or increase it if you wanted to, but again, like the volume type, let's just do one thing at a time, and should you need to increase the disk space, I would do this later on. We do have a knowledge base article on our community page which outlines how to do this both on the AWS console and on the back end of the UTM following a reboot. I'll just drag the page over here. And we can see the knowledge base article number is 132495. And I'll just leave it up there for a second should you want to copy the link. Okay. So, yep, I will leave that blank. Sorry, I will leave that as is at 100 gigs, which is the default. Availability zone. This would be the availability zone that the UTM is deployed into. So if we open up the EC2 console, and I can see for my UTM availability zone 1B. Okay, so let me just make note of that and select 1B. So when you're creating the volume, you want to make sure that the availability zone the volume is being launched in, or sorry, is being created into is the same availability zone as the UTM is already deployed into. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to attach the volume and you'll end up having a backstep. So encryption, it's already toggled on because of course our snapshot is encrypted, so we don't need to touch that. We can go ahead and create the volume at this time. And if we flip back over to the volumes page, we can see the volume is created virtually instantaneously. Um, so I guess the only negative is there's no description. I didn't add any tags, so I'm just going to go by the creation date, and I know this is our encrypted volume. And we can double check that it's encrypted down here in the information, which it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and attach this to the UTM. Attach volume. The instance, well, for me, I only have the one instance in North Virginia, so pretty straightforward there. And this is something you definitely are going to have to do in order for the UTM to boot up correctly. So we're going to have to select dev xvda. If you don't, if you just leave it at default and then you go to try to launch the instance or start the instance, you'll see an error pop up. And once again, you'd have to backpedal and reattach the volume to the instance. So XVDA, we're going to attach it. Attaches instantaneously, and that should be it. If we go back over to the instances page, and start our instance. We should see it pending, and in a moment it should show starting up. Well, pending. There she goes. Oh, she didn't show starting up. She just showed running. Okay, perfect. So the instance is running. Everything's done. We now have an encrypted volume for our UTM. And I'm not going to wait until the status check's complete and to access web and web admin and whatnot. I know based off of the steps we followed here that it's going to boot up correctly and it's going to be accessible. So that will conclude today's video. I'll say thanks for watching. If you have comments or questions, add them below. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.